What is going on, Comic Fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined again. Welcome back to the show, Steve Foxe.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you back on the show. Well, last time we talked, you were in the midst of X-Men 92, and I feel like you've been a little busy since the last time we talked.
Yeah, I've done one or two things since then.
Yeah, and one of the things that has happened, it was already written, but you were nominated for an Eisner with Rainbow Bridge, and that was pretty close, I think, after we talked. And how was that? Like that experience of just getting the nomination and being involved in such a special honor, to even be nominated.
Yeah, well, I mean, you kind of nailed it. The everyone says, "Oh, it's an honor just to be nominated," but the thing is, the Eisners, the nominations are chosen by a jury who,
Yeah.
have no idea who I am, and then the win is decided by votes of people in the industry. So it does kind of feel like the nomination is the big honor because it means an impartial group of people read a bunch of work and thought yours was worthy. And Valentina and Manuel and Haas did such amazing work on the art and lettering
Yeah.
for that book. And I'm such a dog person, so it was nice to have that nod. And then I had a fraction of a nomination this year because Creepshow got nominated, and Erica Henderson and I did a story in that. So I like to say I keep adding up like slices of the Eisner pie.
Right.
Uh, Love is Love, Panel by Panel, Rainbow Bridge, Creep Show, the stuff I edit for James Tynan. So you
Right.
put it all together, and I almost have an Eisner.
So does well, I guess I was curious about that because I know one of the things I've noticed, you do a lot of editing, for James Hynet, like, World Tree and Department of Truth. And I know the Razor Blade behind me, which is sitting on my shelf. And if you all don't know, it's
I
a massive
see.
book. And if I keep looking back, that's a fear that it might fall on me and crush me because it's so massive. Like, but
I
like,
think it's
so
550 pages or close to it.
well, it's funny because I was doing some cons this summer, and I was like, I was thinking about taking that and having creators sign the inside. I'm like, that's gonna be so heavy to carry around all these cons. But so, like, you do some of these editing. Does a nomination hit differently for you when it's something like you're writing, or compared to editing a piece, or is it like anytime you're a part of a nomination, whether it's through an anthology kind of thing, or just your own book, does it just still feel special, or does one just kind of hold a little bit more weight for you?
To be honest, I mean, it's hard not to sound like false modesty or whatever,
Yeah.
but I have a hard time like celebrating myself or thinking too much about my own work. So the ones that involve a whole team and that involve other people, I have a much easier time saying like, "Oh my gosh, congratulations, Department of
Yeah.
Truth team, this is amazing." And I know I'm a part of that, but I don't feel like I'm like, tooting my own horn by saying like, "Go team." So, all of them are an honor, but I do like the ones where I can disassociate just a little bit and celebrate everyone else involved.
So you can just kind of sneak off behind the scenes a little bit in that
Yeah.
nomination. And yeah, it is. I feel like it's got to be sometimes tough to do, like the humble brags. So like when you can be excited about it when you're involved. But that makes sense. So we didn't get to talk last time because we were so focused on X-Men, and I feel like we're going to talk a lot of X-Men again. But before we do that, I got to talk to you about Rainbow Bridge because that was fantastic. And if people haven't read, again, like we said earlier in the show, it's Eisner nominated, like 20, what was it, 2022 nomination?
I think
Last,
that
yeah,
sounds
last
right.
summer.
Yeah.
It's just, and you co-wrote it with Steve, the great team, Steve Orlando. And you got a great team on it. Like, talk to me a little bit about this book of why was it so special for you, and because it seems like it feels like one of those books where you go, your heart is poured into this book. I'm
Oh,
at least
thank you.
that's how I read it when I was reading it. So
Yeah, I mean, Steve Orlando and I are both dog parents. He's got a little corgi and I've got a Chihuahua mix. And the idea for Rainbow Bridge was originally his, the very rough version of it. But I have a background in kids publishing. I used to work for Random House Children's Books as an editor. I've done like 80 licensed kids books for stuff like Baby Shark and Justice League and My Little Pony and everything. So that's how we originally got connected on doing this book. I had more expertise in the kids world and he had this rough idea. And the original idea was actually much more of like a high fantasy kind of story. Like he had pictured almost kind of a Conan the Barbarian sort of thing. And it evolved into something a little more kind of emotionally raw, I
Yeah.
guess, the to really get in a younger person's perspective and not have too many extra trappings of, oh, you can probably hear my dog barking in the background. Not to have too many other trappings of fantasy stuff to distract from that.
Yeah.
But it really was just kind of a very pure creative process where we had this story about a boy and his dog and the idea of having just one more adventure together. Sorry, we're getting a delivery, so my dog's like losing her mind in the other room. But the idea of having just one more adventure together with
Yeah.
the pet that you grew up with. And I don't know about Steve, but I had a dog who we got when I was like 8 or 9, who passed away right when I was in college. So it was kind of hitting that. And I think that's familiar for a lot of people, the animal that you grew up with or that goes through a lot of milestones with you, who passes away at a similar milestone. And for our main character, Andy, who's named after the middle name that Steve, Orlando, and I share, it's both Steve and Andrew. Um, for Andy, he's on the cusp of going to high school. So he's had Rocket with him his whole life. Rocket passes away right before this big, big moment for a young person. But no, I mean, we just had like the perfect team on that book, Valentina, and Manuel Puppo, the colorist, and Haas, who I work with a ton. And Aftershock was testing the waters on doing more all ages work.
Yep.
And, obviously Aftershocks has had its own aftershocks
Yeah.
since then. But we had kind of the perfect moment to come in and do this book
Yeah.
the way we wanted to, with Mike Martz and Christina Harrington, who were great editors to guide us along to that. So yeah, I mean, I feel there's kind of not that much extra to say about it, because it came out really
Right.
how we envisioned it and happened really naturally. The weirdest thing was when we had to do the final lettering pass. Steve and I were both at the vet office for like serious things with both of
Wow.
our dogs, and they're both fine, thank
Yeah.
God, several years ago. But it was like a very eerie moment of like, are we really proofing a book about the animal afterlife
Right.
as both of our dogs go through like medical procedures?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on it because it is, I feel like it's such a powerful book, and to have it for a young person that can go like, I'm going through this, because I mean, I feel like most every child can relate to going through traumatic time with some type of pet in any capacity, and losing that. And then like when you put those significant milestones also in the your protagonist's life, like it just makes sense of like, this is a great book to give someone if they are struggling, because it can kind of help them, I think, kind of process through what they're dealing and going like, oh, I'm not alone on this.
Yeah, the double-edged sword of doing it and it resonating with people is, a lot of the times when people talk to me about it, they're talking to me about it because it hit close to
Yeah.
home. And then I'm like, oh no, I'm sad about your animal.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that this was helpful or cathartic in some
Yeah.
way. But now I'm also sad. And I mean, we just said, my parents just said goodbye to their 19-and-a-half-year-old cat a couple
Wow.
weeks ago. So that was really hard. But I do feel like, I always warned, or I always uh, reaffirmed for people that it's not a sad book. It's
Yeah.
about one last joyous adventure together. It's not Old Yeller.
Right.
It's about celebrating that bond, not mourning it. But of course, there's a little bit of mourning to get through to get to that.
Right. And it's I feel like we mentioned it last time, because I don't think we can talk about having you on a show and not mention, like, you mentioned Random House Publishing and your kids' books, and then we go to something like Razor Blade. Like, do you just have like this wide spectrum of like, all right, I've done a kids' book, now I need to go deep into something like horrific to
I
just
mean, I really have hit like almost every single publishing bracket now, because earlier this year I got to work on a picture book with Mark Kanamura, who's a dancer and activist. So I got to help him write this picture book. So I can say I've done, picture books, early readers, junior novels, middle grade novels, YA books, adult erotica, adult horror, adult superhero. Like, it's kind of, I've covered the spectrum. I have to write an adult novel now, so I just need to pencil
you
that
just
into
need
my
to get.
schedule.
Oh, I just love it, because like someone's like, oh, Rainbow Bridge, oh, Steve Foxe, cool, let's check. no, we're not gonna go that one for my kid. We'll go to the next one. So
Yeah, if I could go back in time, I would probably pick a different pen name just for the kids' books, but you can't always predict where things are going to go
right.
when you're starting out.
So, but last time on the show, we did talk a lot about X-Men because we were in the midst of X-Men 92. And if people are fans of X-Men, there is some big stuff that has just transpired that we are in the midst of everything. That Hellfire Gala dropped and I think blew people's minds.
Yeah, I mean, some of the characters' minds were blown.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard to sit on the secret of that for so long because we started working on. I think I read the first version of the Gala script like last winter,
Okay.
and I've been working on Dark X-Men since 2022. So we've been at this for a while, which is great because then you have the runway to really plan. But it starts to get weird. Like I'm working on a January launch right now. I'm also doing some X-Men Unlimited. I've got Dark X-Men coming out right now. So my head's kind of in like 5 different continuities. And I always have to double check, like, oh, do people know that this happened, or is this still a
Where
secret?
are we at? Well,
So it was a big relief once the
yeah.
gala came out, and we could all talk about what Fall of X actually was. Because I know there's a lot of fear and anxiety that that was going to be like the end of Krakoa, and it was, but it's not the end of the stories we're telling.
Right. So, like, when something like that happens, where like, you've been so involved in the process of doing team stuff, working, there's so many creators that are involved with the X-Men stories, right? You have to have that. Um, what is that process like when you're in that, is there like a room that, like Zoom calls that you guys are all on that you're talking about and you're going like, when you kind of first heard the original first pitch for that, like what was your mind? Because I feel like you're still like trying to do that as a creative mindset too of like, holy buckets, we're going this route.
Yeah, and I had heard about it. Well, because I have several friends in the X office before I got there, so like I
Yeah.
knew I'd heard over time of different things. Usually, I had some idea of what was coming.
Right.
And then I got added to the Slack. We all work on a Slack together, and we
Okay.
do have Zoom meetings, which we very pretentiously call the Quiet Council. But when I first got added, it was obviously a very intimidating feeling because yes, I had done X-Men 92 and I had done the Unlimited that I did a couple years ago of the second loser group from the elections, and I had done the X-Men Annual, which involved coordination with Jerry. But I wasn't added to the Slack until I started work on Dark X-Men. So it's still that feeling of being like the freshman in the room. Especially with some writers I've really looked up to for a long time. But once I kind of got my sea legs, everyone's so collaborative, everyone's really welcoming. And I came in at the same time as Torin and Dennis. So we had kind of an incoming group of folks
Right.
working on Fall of X. But it really has just been the best experience because we are sharing plot lines and characters and art that we get excited about. We
Right.
vent to each other about things that are annoying us. We can say like, oh, no one's using so and so. Like, is there a place for this character to land? Or I love this character, but I don't have space for them. Could this one want to take them? So it's been really cool. And I don't think many superhero like sublines like
Right.
the X-Men have been run like this before. Jordan White really kind of took on a monumental extra amount of work to coordinate these books because if you think back even a couple of years, the books used to be a lot more disconnected unless there was an active crossover happening.
Right.
And now we can passively share a lot more. Like some of the characters people saw in Dark X-Men #1 are going to pop up in Uncanny Spider-Man, and then from there go to Astonishing Iceman. And that's the kind of like passive coordination that we can do because we're all in communication with each other all the time.
So what is it then for you? Like, I love getting kind of the behind the scenes a little bit for, for the fans of, you know, getting on a book like Dark X-Men. How did that process happen for you? Because I know you've been connected with Marvel for a long time, and you've been, connected with people working on X-Men. But like for you then, like getting that project, was that something that people pitched to you, or you kind of had an idea for something that you're like, I want to do something? How did that kind of come about?
Yeah, well, I'll tell the like condensed version. Jordan White's been really great about looking out for me. We've known each other for a long time. I was his intern over a decade ago. And then, we stayed in contact over the years. And once I did Spider Ham at Scholastic with Shadia Amin, who's, one of my favorite collaborators, that's where he was like, oh, maybe I have a spot for him. And that's how X-Men 92 happened. But he made sure to kind of keep feeding me opportunities to move closer to my interests, which are, more adult storytelling.
Right.
So from X-Men 92, which was a little more openly comedic, we got the Unlimited story because he knew I wanted to work in continuity. From that, he brought up the X-Men Annual where he said, don't go funny on this one, tell a serious story. And that was the
Yep.
Firestar story. And then not long after that annual came out, or maybe even a little bit before, he called me up and he said that they were doing a book called Dark X-Men. All they had was it was going to loosely spin out of Dark Web. So Maddie and Havoc are the main characters, and CB Cebulski thought it would be cool if I used Albert.
Okay.
And that's where we started. There was everything else was kind of open ended. And the first pitch, it changed a lot from the first pitch to the second because he had not. Can I swear on here? I forget.
You're allowed to. Yeah, you're fine. So
So he had called me after I turned in the first outline, and he's like, "I don't think I adequately told you how fucked the mutants are." And that was like the extent of Fall of X was
yeah.
to say like, "Oh, things are even more dire than I think he had prepared me for on the first call." But yeah, he knew I loved horror. He knew I loved stuff like Evil Dead, which is one of his favorite franchises. He knew I'd done stuff like Razor Blades, and I edit horror books for James.
Right.
So he was giving me a platform to pull some of those interests into the X-Men world that I was orbiting around. And I think like a month before that, I had said on some podcast that my next bucket, like I kept hitting bucket list goals. And I was like, I guess the next one is to do like a horror book at Marvel. And then right after that, Jordan was like, hey, you want to do horror X-Men?
So you just got to speak it into existence. So what's your next bucket list? And we'll say that we'll have that happen. And
Someone gives me $1 million.
all right, nice. If that happens, I expect a
Oh,
little bit of that. I expect not even 10%, just a little bit.
sure. Yeah,
I'm not even greedy.
I'll Venmo you something in the low 4 digits.
Yeah, that's
Just to
fine.
be fair.
I'm
Yeah.
not too. I'm not too. So you're in these rooms, you're in these meetings with all these people. If someone hasn't gotten to check out Dark X-Men, because at the time of this recording, the first issue's out. What is kind of your pitch, your story for it? Let's just go with that first, and I'll ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short pitch is this is the closest a mainline X-Men book has ever come to a horror story.
Okay.
The X-Men have fallen, the world is turned against mutants, and Madeline Pryor, who has been screwed over multiple times in her life, she is the queen of limbo, and she has decided she's going to fill the void left behind by the X-Men, but she's going to do it her way. And this is the monsters, misfits, and freaks unleashed in the X-Men world.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you nailed it, and which obviously you would. You wrote the book, so you should be able to. But so, how is it different? Is it different for you as a process then of taking something like Dark X-Men that is so connected into an event where you have to follow along with probably things that are happening? Is it hard for you? Does it feel like it's a tension for you to be able to still tell a solo story, kind of, if people want to just pick up Dark X-Men because they like those characters and maybe not all the other books in the Fall of X? Like, how do you balance that as a creator?
Yeah, I mean, I actually really like having like parameters to work in. I think that can be very freeing. Ironically enough, like I think it can be really creatively stimulating to say, okay, here's the 3 things you have to do,
Yeah.
and how you get there is up to you. But the thing to say very explicitly about Fall of X is that it's not an event, it's a banner. So if you do just want to read Dark X-Men and Alpha Flight, you can do that. All you need to know is, obviously I encourage you to pick up everyone's work, but
Right.
you can pick and choose if you want. All you need to know is things got really bad for the mutants. Here's the response. And with Dark X-Men in particular, I feel strongly that as fun as it is to do deep cut references or pull weirdo characters, X-Men 92 was full of cameos.
Right.
But as fun as it is to do that, the reader needs to be able to follow the story based just on the book they're buying right now. And I have some, esoteric choices in the book. Azazel, Implate, these are not characters who've been around a lot recently.
Yeah.
But if you just read these 5 issues, you will know everything you need to know about the cast for the story at hand. And if you've read more, that's great. You'll have a fuller picture of who they are and where they've come from. But like the last page of issue 1 features kind of a bizarro cut. I don't think people would have expected this character to pop back up. But the first page of issue 2 tells you everything you need to know about her. So no one needs to feel lost or put out. And that's just something I feel strongly about.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
and I mean, I can't even give counter examples without like throwing people under the bus, but nothing kicks you in the shins like turning the page for like a reveal and just being like, what is this?
Yeah.
Like I don't get it. So I try pretty strongly, like, you read these 5 issues, you're going to get a complete story. If you've read other stuff, you'll get an even more illuminated story.
Right.
But this is all you need to pick up.
Yeah. Is the process for you, how does the process change for you then when, because I'm sure it has to, I assume, when you're writing something, solo, whereas then like you're co-writing something with Steve Orlando with Rainbow like how different is that process of co-writing to then just solo writing?
Yeah, I also got to co-write with Steph Williams on the current X-Men Unlimited arc. So I only co-write with people who have some variation of my name.
Right. Like
Yeah.
if you are a Greg like me, you're out. Like, no, I'm
No,
not
no
writing.
Gregs, no Roberts, no Alistairs. You guys are cooked. Yeah. It really has changed so much project to project.
Okay.
So like for instance with Steph, Steve and I knew each other really well. Steph and I didn't, but I really admired her work. We'd become friends on social media. And I thought it'd be really cool to work together. I thought we'd find something unique between the two of us. And so we had like a long call where we kind of just, hashed things out and talked things through, got to, feel each other out, and then, broke down the work as we needed to and came back. And it has turned into this really awesome friendship. So there's no one answer I can
Yeah,
give.
yeah, yeah.
Obviously, when I'm working by myself, it's fun because I just get to do whatever I want. But when I'm splitting the duties with someone else, there are things that they might suggest that I never would have thought of. Or, I love the editing process. I am an editor. I like finishing something, taking some time off, and then reading it with fresh eyes. So when you're collaborating with someone, that's baked into the process where I send a script to Steve and he might notice something that I did not even think of, and point it out, and the story becomes better for that.
So you mentioned editing, and people might not even know, that you are an editor because you are so involved in writing so much stuff. But like we said earlier in the show, you edit a lot. It seems like for James Tynion with Razor Blades, which you both co-wrote, and then you edited that behemoth of a book, and and then World Tree and Department of Truth.
And
How did you?
the Deviant, which just got
Yeah.
announced.
So
Yeah, James and Josh Hickson.
how did you get into editing, and then kind of yeah, and then how does that shift for you of like helping you as a writer as well?
Yeah, well, I have known James casually for a long time. Obviously he's sort of a protege of Scott Snyder. Scott was one of my teachers in college briefly, not the same college that James went to. And Scott and I didn't stay as close, but we stayed in contact. So I knew James, I knew of James, and around the time that Something is Killing the Children was about to launch at Boom, the first issue hadn't come out yet. The first editor he lined up for Department of Truth had to part ways for, understandable reasons.
Yeah.
And he was kind of casting around to see who might be a good fit for the series. And Steve Orlando actually suggested me. And James and I went out to lunch and had a long conversation. And he had given me Something's Killing the Children to read early. And we hit it off well. We're similar ages, have similar references, and similar interests in the horror world and the literary world. And we've just got along really well. It's not a, particularly complicated working relationship.
Yeah.
Like we're good friends. We like a lot of the same stuff. We're texting all day. He jokes that like as he expands his operations, people are going to try to break him of the texting habit. But like we conduct a lot of our business via text because it's just faster.
Yeah.
And Department of Truth with him and Martin Simmons and Aditya Bidikar, that went great. So when it came time to launch and develop World Tree with Fernando Blanco and Jordi and Aditya again, and now the Deviant with Josh Hickson and Haas, I became his image guy. So we've been working on all those books simultaneously. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of fun. And it's cool to get to see how books are made behind the scenes. And, even just there, we're talking about such different artists. Martin
Right.
Simmons is a painter and a mixed media artist, and he's doing stuff that would look right at home in Vertigo in 1995, blowing people's minds. And then you have Josh Hickson, who's like a digital painter, and he's doing it all himself and watching it go from rough sketches to colors. Or Fernando, who's come up in the superhero world but had this whole other side to him that we're really unleashing in this book. It's just been really cool to see all of that come together, and other secret projects that James and I may be cooking up in the near future.
Nice. So, you know, as a writer, you obviously are super involved in the writing aspect and the other aspects, obviously, of the book. But as an editor, I'm assuming you kind of are involved in all aspects of it, right?
Yeah, I will say the only like downside to working with James, especially working at Image, is we really get to control most aspects of the book. We're sitting down and deciding the variant cover artists. We're deciding if we're going to try stuff like foil covers or whatever. We're moving the schedule around as we need to. If we decide we need 4 extra pages this issue, like we're answering to ourselves
Yeah.
and the budget,
Right.
but to ourselves more or less. So it can be frustrating then to turn back around to the work for hire world where it's like, ooh, oh, look, can I just like
Just
let me jump in here? But I'm also very lucky. Like Jordan's a really collaborative editor on X-Men,
yeah.
so I'm seeing all the art as it comes in, and we're all pitching in together. So it's not as I've done some things for other publishers that I no longer work with where the process was hard because it was so detached.
Yeah.
Marvel is happily a nice medium in
Yeah.
between the do everything yourself of Image and you know no control.
Has editing, well, because I feel like, were you editing because you were doing stuff at Random House? Was editing before writing, or has editing shaped, how has editing shaped your writing of comic books, or has it at all, or vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but my first job out of college was editing. And I was at Random House when I won the Top Cow Talent Hunt. That was my first published writing, and that was alongside Teenie Howard, who's a great friend of mine who also worked in the X office, and Isaac Goodhart, who's the artist on Christopher Chaos, who's one of my best friends. And also, that's how we met Ryan Cady, who's done a lot of work, and Phil Seavey, who I'm going to be working with at Marvel very soon on something that's not announced yet. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like a cool little
Yeah.
pod of friends that we all stayed close, and we all still get to work together. But yeah, so I did start editing first. I think it has certainly affected my process because, like I
Okay.
said, my favorite part of writing is really the editing and the rewriting. Like you get it all out, you can take a step back and breathe and say, oh, this isn't working, this needs to move, this is not landing the way you want it to. There's always a limit to how objective you can be about your own work, but I like to think that coming up as an editor has helped me be a little more objective about it.
Yeah.
I'm not super precious where if an editor is like, oh, this line doesn't sound right, I'm not like, oh, how dare you, my voice. um I think it's improved the way I work with editors. And then working with James, obviously he was already very successful when we got together to do Department of Truth. So it's not like I'm editing James because I'm an authority that he does not have. It is that idea of like a peer who's able to see stuff that you can't.
Right.
I've certainly learned things from editing him and from working with his collaborators, and the other people who work on those books, because my job there isn't to say, oh, this is how Steve Foxe would do World Tree. It's to make sure James, Fernando, Jordy, and Aditya's World Tree is coming through the way those four want to do
Right.
it. So I think it all goes in the pot that is the creative process, but it's not always like a clean and clear like, oh, from James I have learned XYZ.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was cool to kind of hear the behind the scenes. And Steve, I want to be respectful of your time. I know, obviously, if you've been listening to this interview or watching this interview, Steve is very busy. You got a lot on your plate. So, but before I let you go, I know on your Twitter profile that you mentioned that Spider Woman coming up soon in the fall. Is there anything else? Obviously, Dark X-Men right now, currently
Yeah.
5 issues. Is there anything else that's kind of going on that you want to talk about, that you can talk about, I guess? Let's say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do just want to explicitly say so much of the appeal of Dark X-Men to me is Jonas Scharf, my collaborator on the book. I could not have asked for a better partner in this to do this kind of high gothic horror without losing the superhero angle. He and Frank Martin are the artistic team on the book, and we also had Nelson Daniel for the first issue for a slightly more comedic backup, which was like a
Yeah.
nice tension reliever after kind of a downbeat first issue. So I want to give all of them fair credit because it's just amazing. Jonas sent over some pages from 5 today that was just like, psh. And yeah, Spider-Woman comes out in November. I'm working with Carola Borelli on that. She's
Okay.
an interior artist. She's doing a bang up job, such a slick Jess. And we're putting her in the midst of Gang War, which is the big crossover in Marvel's Spider-Man and sort of street level books this
Yeah.
fall, where Peter Parker gets a little more proactive after the events of Amazing Spider-Man 31, where the gang violence in New York, and of course we're talking about superpowered gangs in this
Right.
case, has really gone too far. And Spider-Woman's involved in that, but she also has a very personal crusade during that.
Mhm.
So it does tie into gang war, and it all plays against gang war, but it's also a very Spider-Woman centric story. And you can get a taste of it in Amazing Spider-Man 31. It was crazy to be involved in an issue of Amazing Spider-Man. That was really quite the bucket list thing to check off. And for that, the artist was Eric Koda, who did a killer job. And then also right now, X-Men Unlimited, I'm doing a serial with Steph Williams and an artist named Noemi Vittori and Pete Pezcanis. I think I butchered his last name. I'm so sorry. But these are 6 spotlight stories on the election candidates from this year. So Juggernaut,
Yep.
Cannonball, Dazzler, Jubilee, Frenzy, and Prodigy. And they are kind of more slice of life. We always hear from X fans like they want stories of the mutants just enjoying Krakoa and exploring nooks and crannies of this world that aren't just everything's going terrible and
Right.
Orcus is killing everyone. So now that we've, spoiler alert, killed 5 of these characters, we're turning back the clock to highlight what made them worthy candidates for the X-Men in the first place. And very soon after that serial concludes, you will probably see more of me in a vertical scrolling format. So I can't spoil it,
Okay.
too explicitly right now, but keep checking any unlimited apps you may have, and you'll see my name again pretty soon.
Yeah.
And finally, sorry, I
No,
have
you're fine.
yeah, Spider-Ham Volume 3 with Shadia Amin comes out in October. I love the Spider-Ham series. It's what got me started in the superhero world. Peter Porker is such a unique character to take on. Shadia is so fun to collaborate with. And this volume, we planned it knowing that Spider-Verse was going to come out. So it involves Spider-Ham 2099 and Spider-Rex in a sort of cross-time caper. Shadia drew so many green gobblers, like so many evil turkeys of just every variety you can imagine. And finally, the All Eight Eyes trade paperback, which is my original horror series with Piotr Kowalski, Brad Simpson, and Haas. That comes out from Dark Horse in November.
Nice.
Whew.
Yeah. Like I said, you've been busy since last time we talked.
Lucky to stay booked and busy.
So, well, where can people follow along with you? To just see, because like you said, you got a lot coming out, and you got some announcements probably that are coming out sooner than later, it sounds like. So if people want to follow along and hear that, where can they do that?
I keep my website, stevefoxe.com, updated very regularly, and that's Foxe. And for now, I'm still on Twitter or X or whatever it's called this week at Steve_Foxe. But it's pretty much just for updates. I'm not really, I post new work that gets announced or that's coming out, but I'm not really like hanging around there anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, it's always ever since that change, people have been like, what do I call it now? X is Twitter. I'm like, just call it Twitter. I don't care. Like people
I
don't
mean,
know.
the eye roll in the X-Men Slack when he changed it to X was very severe. But it was kind of funny that he distressed the app icon right when Fall of X launched, and all of our data pages are distressed now. So it's like, you following along?
Maybe an X-Men fan. Who knows? So, well, Steve, thank you so much just for taking some time to talk about comics with me. Gang, all the links that we mentioned will be in the description of this video, or if you're listening on podcast, check out the description there. Check out Dark X-Men right now. Like I said, issue 1 is out at the time of this recording. It's going to be a fun rest of the ride. I can't wait to see where else you go with this. So thanks for
It just
talking
gets
with me.
more gruesome. But yes, thank you so much for having me back. It's always a blast.
Yeah. So I'm sure eventually you're gonna, in a couple months you're gonna have 18,000 more things done. So we'll reach out again and set something up. So
I'll have to think ahead to grow my mustache out beforehand so we can meet facial hairs.
Yes, it's I had someone on the other day. I was like, it's not a requirement to have a beard. I was like, no, I'd be very limited on my guests then. So
you wouldn't be that limited in comics. You'd be able to fill up a couple months of your schedule.
So, well, gang, go check out all the stuff that we've talked about. And with that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.